Time is not a force, it's instead a perception of change driven by laws of physics. Keep in mind though that most people mean different things when talking about the word time, not that they know that. They could mean like state of change of a given area, or independent web that connects past, present, and future, which I call the force of time. And although I'm saying that the words are just references to concepts, keep in mind that it changes nothing about this theory, since most people do not know what they're actually referring to when saying the word time, except a bunch of patterns, which I know it's more complicated than that, but I'm simplifying for the sake of length. And this video is basically about what these patterns mean. My claim in this video is that this force web doesn't exist, and that change is instead caused by the natural state of application of laws of reality, which I'll explain all of that in a second, but I just wanted to mention that I call this something misunderstanding of time theory, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. Now, in terms of terminology, the two most important terms are natural and unnatural states, but there's also applicability, universal or objective time, and local or subjective time. The last two are the least important. And the easiest way to explain all of this is that most people think that laws of physics, reality, which is a broader category, require a medium like time to function. So basically, the natural state, and this is what natural state means, is that they're not applicable. In layman terms, they are off, essentially. So applicable means a state when the force changes. And they think that time is required to force that state to unnatural, which is applicable, essentially. So they think that time is a medium required to make these laws force changes within reality. And most likely, this is completely backwards, and the natural state of laws of physics is that they are applicable. Just think about it this way. If all laws of reality are naturally in the unapplicable state, so in a state when they are not forcing any changes, like how can time function? Because it presumably, being a law of reality, would require a medium to be in a state to force changes. In its case, the changes it would force would be that it allows other laws to force changes upon reality, or allowing other laws to function. But then what allows this medium to function, which is the medium that allows time to function, and its medium, and so on and so on. So of course you then got to ask yourself, like, why would time even be required? Because, I mean, clearly, laws of physics can naturally be in an applicable state, or they can force changes without any other mediums. I mean, that's kind of a requirement for our reality, because, of course, then, again, otherwise, like, what would be the first medium? Like, clearly something can force changes without any other mediums. Now, you might say that maybe time is an exception, and it can do that while other laws can't. Although, then you're gonna ask yourself, like, why? Why would time be an exception? I mean, yes, it does allow other laws of physics to operate, so perhaps it allows itself to operate, and perhaps that's true, but that still means that this sub-law, and again, English doesn't have vocabulary to describe this, and as you kind of saw throughout this video, had to come with quite a few new terms, so but it does mean that this sub-law, whatever you want to call this, can be naturally in its applicable state, and the sub-law I'm talking about obviously is that it allows itself to operate, and then it operates on other laws allowing them to operate. Anyway, so there are things which can naturally force changes upon reality, and I define changes here as state 1 to state 2, or laws can't operate to laws can operate, as in cannot to can. So, to summarize, and although you might be getting tired of it, it is really important. Time isn't the required medium, and laws can force changes, but otherwise the universe simply can't function, as nothing could start. And allowing a law to function or itself is also a form of change, which, again, that would have to be, like, if that requires a medium to function, then, like, pretty much nothing can ever start, as what will be the first thing to ever, like, start. I think I've explained it pretty well, and the natural state of laws of reality is the applicable state where they force changes. That is a bit of a reach, admittedly, but it's at least possible for that state to be, for that to be the case, since we know that these some laws have to be naturally in the applicable state. And now for the evidence. So firstly, it removes the paradoxes, and what I mean by that is the time, or I wrote here change, but like, obviously I explained, time is better described as a perception of change than change itself, but change essentially only has on and off states, and by that what I mean is that, so imagine essentially that you have a project, let's say 3D project, doesn't have to be a 3D project, just some kind of project, and you have certain values in that project, let's say x, y, z coordinates, maybe the scale of the given objects within the scene. It doesn't ultimately matter. I'm just using that because I'm kind of familiar with programming, but also specifically game making and working in Blender. Not actually that much, but anyway, the point is that it doesn't have to be there. But the point is that, let's say you want to go back to the previous state of the project, like basically the past essentially of the project. But instead of just going to, let's say, a save file and quote unquote loading the past of that project, you instead manually move all of these objects into their previous positions. And of course the question would then be, did you really go back to the past? Because that's essentially what happens in reality, as change really again has only on and off states. You can basically arrive at the exact same state of existence there was previously, but I'm sure calling it the past is actually pretty subjective. What if you did exactly what I've said previously, but instead of arriving at exactly the same values, instead arrive at values that almost indistinguishable essentially, but slightly different? I mean, is that really the past? I think a lot of people would say no, even though you can very much argue it's indistinguishable from the true past. And similarly in like reality, if you force the universe to its previous position, all the atomic particles and subatomic particles their previous positions would actually be the past. What if they were in slightly tiny bit different positions, like Planck lengths different positions? I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's not really like distinguishable, you could argue, but it's not really, I mean, at least argue that it's not really the past. And at the very least, it is philosophical framing at that point. I mean, it's not really something you can just say, okay, this is the past, this isn't the past. Again, change only has on off states. You either have change or you don't have change. And if you have change, then everything else at that point is just philosophical framing. The past is gone and there's nothing through which you can even come back to it, which I think that's the part is self-explanatory. But even if you did actually force the universe to its previous state of changes, so as you guess you can call it the past, you would simply arrive at one of three main scenarios. So these are the new past, the loop universe, and the randomized universe, or I guess you can call it the false loop. Well, new past is essentially just the future self plus the actual past itself. Or I guess, as I've said in this metaphor, you put all the things in its previous positions within that scene or that project or whatever, but you left one thing slightly different. So is that really the past? Pretty arguable. And the other is essentially if you truly went back to the past, so there's no you there, you just kind of force the universe's previous state of changes, and then it's just a matter of whatever the universe is random, in which case it's a false loop. And things don't really repeat themselves exactly the same, but otherwise you create a loop as you go back, or you force the universe to its previous state of changes of the past. Things just repeat themselves. You arrive at let's say they call it the turning point, which then forces the universe to its previous state, and then things just repeat themselves until you also repeating the universe. I don't know what to even call this. Like again, you just create a loop, but it is self-consistent. It does actually make sense. Nothing really breaks. And the universe just kind of functions. It's not really a paradox, it's just, I don't know, you could even argue, may even be a good thing. I mean, you could theoretically prolong your existence forever, and that way prolong the end of the universe. It might really be impossible to stop it, although how do you create that loop is beyond me. How do you even go back to the previous state of existence of the universe is actually beyond me. You could do it locally, but doing it everywhere is, well, it will be very difficult, not only because it violates, like, not only because of the amount of like energy that would actually require, and actually remembering all the positions of all the atomic particles would be very difficult. Like, why would you even note that? But even if you somehow did that, you then have the problem of like doing that in the exact same time, which again will require moving the sort of energy faster than light. Which, I mean, I guess the time could violate it, you could say, or maybe not, because I guess the way people think in terms of going back in time, you would actually just arrive at something that exists, so the past exists within that time, again, that web that connects past, present, and future, so maybe it doesn't really break everything, but yeah, I mean, there's no paradoxes here. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I think it just sort of works. If you therefore went back to the past and tried, let's say, recreating the grandfather paradox, well, you would actually be able to do it. It's just that it no longer would violate basic cause and effect. And what I mean by that is that if you somehow, and I really mean somehow because I have no idea how this could be possible, but if you somehow manage to move all the particles into their previous positions, and then recreated the grandfather paradox, and I'm being careful with words because this is YouTube, and maybe I'm being overly paranoid, probably, but I tend to be overly paranoid, and this is my channel, so just too bad. But if you then recreated this, and it's very literal sense, well, then you would look at the lifeless body of your grandfather, and and if you did notice here, you'll be surprised that, well, why does nothing break? Why does the universe just continue as if nothing happened? It's because the basic cause and effect is not violated. The people that created you, so your parents, and of course your grandfather in this case who created your parents, these people already did that. It happened in the past, because in truth you didn't really move to the past, and you could even argue that all of these people are just clones. You recreated the past, but you didn't truly go back to it, essentially. It's just a version of it. Like objective time, again, change can only happen or not happen. There's no negative change. And since there doesn't exist a web, or seemingly doesn't exist a web that connects past, future, and present, the force of time, well, that simply means that recreating the past is just that, it's recreate the past. It's all you're really doing is moving change onward, and just because the state of changes happens to be exactly the same as the previous state of changes, it means nothing to objective universe. The objective time, and this is essentially what objective time is, although it's a bit more complicated, it's essentially like if you pause the universe, if you literally pause the whole universe and all the local states of changes were paused essentially. So it's essentially, it's the time slices compared to, well, I don't know, the state of the universe in any given time that you would pause it essentially. Kind of like, it's the best way I can actually explain this. So, but everything is internally self-consistent. And a controversial point here is that a universe probably cannot have true paradoxes. And by true paradoxes, I just mean ones that truly break cause and effect. I mean, a lot of paradoxes are just like word paradoxes or theoretical paradoxes, like the Infinite Hotel, or I think that's what it was called. But the reason is because it likely doesn't have a fail switch, as now our reality likely doesn't have a fail switch. And the fail switch is essentially just a mechanism that decides what actually happens if this is activated, because unless this is written, and written in huge quotation marks, like all laws of reality are written into our reality, whatever is electromagnetism, gravity, weak shrunk for us, etc., like unless it's written, what exactly would decide that? It's, I don't know, it's a strange topic actually, because if a universe truly is a random occurrence, which I'm not saying it isn't, but if it is, it will be a very, very specific. It seems very unlikely that it is somehow able to prevent true paradox, since it's like it playtests itself or something. And obviously, if it, if it does actually have a fail switch, because actually we don't know whatever it does or does not have true paradoxes, we just haven't activated one yet. Well, then again, it's a very specific thing. Like, why would that actually even exist within reality? Unless, of course, it cannot just not exist. Look, this is a whole another topic. I'm not even going to, like, it requires some video, a lot of explaining. I haven't actually thought about that much, but it is an interesting thing that occurred to me recently after I actually wrote the script, because I originally didn't even consider that. But so secondly, and this ties into point number 3, but based on available evidence, like measurements of time passage, how gravity affects, well, time again, it is the most likely conclusion. And what I mean by that is that based on existing evidence and observation of how time even functions, it is, ironically enough, the most, I guess you can say, conservative or moderate position on, reserved position essentially on this topic. I mean, again, it is technically going a bit against the kind of popular status quo, but in truth, it is actually really just looking at the way our reality works and then drawing conclusions from, like, a different way I can, I guess, explain it to you would be that there's simply very little reason to assume that laws of physics need to be naturally in an applicable state, but the whole thing hinges on the fact that time, or the force of time, is an extremely specific law of physics that is just, it's very unlikely for it to exist because of how many other options. It's kind of, okay, to explain this would be so incredibly difficult, because I have to explain why scientific method in general, and frankly, we as humanity, it's more likely for us to assume, or like it's more logical for us to assume that something does not exist than it does exist. And this ties into that. Force of time is a very specific thing that we have very little evidence for, and it's more logical for us to assume that it doesn't exist than it does exist, because there's so many things that could exist. And basically, there's more things that seemingly do not exist in our reality that they do exist in our reality. It's more complicated than that, but I don't have time to explain that. It's just assumed in most fields, but there's specific reasons that often are not really said why this actually makes a lot of sense. I can make a whole video about that, but this isn't really the time for that. And my theory is that it hinges on things that we know do exist. Like it is possible for laws to exist in the applicable state. Otherwise, again, nothing could start in a universe. Like there has to be a first medium, or not, I guess. But something has to be in its applicable state for reality to function. And if we just assume that time does have to exist, I mean, what at point we might as well just assume that mediums allowing time to exist do exist, because what is the likelihood of time naturally being in this applicable state? It's probably not very likely, because that all the laws of physics presumably are not in its applicable state, unless we do say it's like 50-50 and time only allows like 50% of laws of physics to operate, while the other half are naturally in the applicable state, which kind of still aligns with my theory in in theory, which is a funny way to put it, but it is kind of accurate. I hope you get it by now. Thirdly, and this ties into the fact that if nothing can move faster than light, which as far as we know is the case, although again this opens the door to that being possible at the very least, or at the very least not breaking laws of, not breaking our reality, but the changes should naturally slow down close to it, and stop at it, as in like, what I mean by that is that changes require movement. So example being that an atomic particle moving at speeds faster than light can have internal changes, as they would require the moving at speeds exceeding speeds faster than light, or decreasing in speed in most circumstances. Again, you will have to like draw it for you to properly visualize this, but the idea basically is that this should happen regardless of whatever any other parts of this theory are correct. Like, we kind of can just say that, okay, this definitely would have to happen. Like, if you're moving at speeds, and if you're moving at light speed, there can't be any internal changes within you essentially. So an object moving at light speed can have internal changes because they would require the specific subcomponents of it moving at speeds close to, slowing down or moving at speed faster than light. Now there might be some specific exceptions, like I don't want to even get into that because it ties into like some, but for like simplicity's sake, let's just say that is almost always the case, and unless there's some specific exceptions that is required, and they would actually be correct again, regardless of whatever. And this is why I said that gravity influencing like this is a bit of a also a good way to put it, is aligning with is an evidence for this theory existing, because gravity would also presumably change the given like internal components of particles have to like fight against gravity to move in a given direction, which means that change within them should slow down. At least that's one theory of this. But anyway, the point is that this should be correct regardless. I completely forgot to mention as well previously that basically the idea is that what did I actually forget to mention? I really forgot now again. So the fourth piece of evidence, I almost said fourthly, but it just sounds really awkward. But the fourth piece of evidence is that the original theory might be completely internally inconsistent. And because I've already kind of touched upon it quite a few times in this video, I'm just going to summarize it. So, how can time function of natural state of laws of reality is the unapplicable state? And what will be the medium that allowed it to function, and the medium that allowed it to function, and what will be the first medium? Basically, is that laws of reality are unlikely to require any kind of medium to function, as we know that at least some laws of reality do not require that. And even if it was, let's say, 50-50, there's a bit of a problem there, because what is the probability then of there existing a force, like force of time, that would allow other laws of physics to operate? It seems like it's an ultra-specific thing. And because this is getting kind of long, I'll just kind of skip over the other parts of the explanation, because I already have gone over this essentially fourth point at an earlier part of this video. So I'll just end it with a note. Well, actually, I won't end it with this, but a note here is that I have a fifth piece of evidence, but I forgot about it. I may or may not add it later on. And honestly, I thought least about the evidence for this video after the first 2 or 3 points. So, conclusion plus summary is that no force of time tying past, future, and present exists, and we create a time as a concept based on our perception of change, and it's what time seems to be. Well, change is enacted by the natural state of application of laws of reality. And another note here is that I had this theory in some version for years, so no, it's not actually inspired by any other theories. It's more like an ego thing than anything else, but I can mention this. I had this note for a while, and why not, I guess. I mean, it's basically there to showcase how incredibly smart I am, how incredibly creative I am, and how incredibly humble I am, and in general just better than everyone else. And yeah, that's the end of the video.